In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about sulfur emissions, and finally, I talk about solar manufacturing. Welcome back to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host Akshara, and today is Tuesday, 22nd July. Coming to the first story, are we helpless about our sulfur emissions? To go green is to get a million different things right, many of which can feel impossibly hard. Yesterday, we spoke about the economics of air pollution and the many ways pollution acts as a drag on our economy. Today, we're talking about the opposite, about how challenging it is to actually address pollution in practice. The Indian government has spent a long time trying to clean up our legacy sources of energy, especially coal. Only this has proved to be trickier than one would hope. Many of our coal power plants were built decades ago. We had different priorities back then. We were simply looking to electrify India in a way that made sense given our economic and political constraints. This worked to bring a lot of India on the grid. But now, those plants have operated for a few decades and their commercials have crystallized. Cleaning things after the fact has been harder than we hoped. This reality hit home on July 11th, 2025, when the Union Environment Ministry rolled back a key anti pollution mandate exempting some coal power plants from cutting their sulfur emissions. But what forced us to rethink our ambitions? Let's dive in. When a lump of coal turns into electricity, it releases a toxic cocktail into the air: sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, mercury, and all sorts of other stuff that's terrible for you. Back in December 2015, worried by the impact coal has on air quality, India's Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, or MOEFCC, introduced new emission norms for power plants, setting limits for major pollutants. One of them was sulfur dioxide. So, to cut out sulfur dioxide, it asked power plants to set up flue gas desulfurization, or FGD units, essentially scrubbers in coal plant chimneys. The system would spray emissions with a limestone slurry which would react with sulfur dioxide, trapping it before the gas was released. The government then identified coal units across India to be retrofitted with these scrubbers and gave them an aggressive deadline. They had 2 years to comply. Those systems would have to be in place by 2017. Now, there's only so much the mandate could do. Even as the 2017 deadline loomed, hardly any plant had installed an FGD. It was simply too large an investment. Any plant operator would have to shell out hundreds of crores on such systems. Worse still, the smaller a plant was, the more expensive the system would be. Meanwhile, the investment would generate little to no upside for anyone that ran a plant. Naturally, power producers dragged their feet, pleading for more time. The government relented. The deadline was pushed out. It simply seemed impractical to instantly slash pollution all across the country. It made more sense to be stricter in areas where pollution was getting genuinely bad and then work one's way to the rest of the company. Slowly, the idea of phased, category wise deadlines took hold. By March 2021, the MOEFCC came up with 3 tiers based on urgency. Category A: units within 10 km of Delhi NCR or any other city with over 1 million people. Category B: units within 10 kilometers of area with high pollution or cities that continually failed national air quality standards. Category C: all other units in more remote areas. Now, each category was given its own deadline. Category A plants had to install FGDs by 2022, Category B by 2023, and Category C by 2024. On the ground, though, progress remained slow. Most power stations made little tangible progress beyond initial paperwork, and by December 2024, only about 11% of our thermal power plants by capacity had installed such systems. The rest was stuck somewhere in procurement. Those deadlines were extended repeatedly. By December 2024, the deadlines for Category A plants was pushed to 2027, Category B to 2028, and Category C to 2029. But with this, a new reality was slowly becoming clear. This wasn't a problem you could solve with simple mandates and deadlines. After 9 years of trying, nearly 80% of the planned retrofits remained incomplete. We needed a change of track. It's in this context that the government made a tough choice: the sulfur exemption decision. On July 11, 2025, the Environment Ministry issued an order exempting Category C plants entirely from having to meet the sulfur dioxide emission norm. These units, which were roughly 400 coal-fired boilers totaling around 145 gigawatts of capacity, no longer have to install FGDs as long as they maintain their tall chimneys as per older rules. Category B plants too got partial reprieve. They shall now be judged case by case by an expert committee, and if their emissions aren't particularly bad, they'll potentially be given more time or leniency. It's only category A plants, those near big cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, etc., which make for barely 10% of our thermal power production, which still need to comply by December 2027. So, how should you see this shift? This is what the government says. The revised sulfur dioxide emission policy is not a roadblock of environmental safeguards, but a pragmatic, scientifically justified shift towards more targeted, cost effective, and climate coherent regulation. So the problem boiled down to the economic costs of such a project. To retrofit hundreds of coal units with FGDs is a project that would take rupees 1.3 to rupees 1.8 lakh crore. Roughly two-thirds of this cost would have to be borne by public sector enterprises like NTPC. If these entities were to make such a huge expenditure, where would the money come from? There was only one way to curb SO2 emissions in a way that would make financial sense: recouping those costs from customers. By some calculations, consumers would have to pay an extra rupees 0.2 to zero point 0.5 for each kilowatt hour if every plant installed a scrubber. And that would practically be impossible. So, India's electricity rates are set through a complex mix of long term contracts, regulatory decisions, and political barriers. To justify higher rates, a company like NTPC would have to renegotiate purchase agreements, justify a change in prices to the CERC, fight challenges from state governments and electricity regulators, and survive political turmoil. If they didn't succeed, their plants would become unviable and their debt burdens would shoot up. For context, just by exempting Category C plants, government efficiency saved consumers rupees 19,000 to rupees 24,000 crore per year in potential tariff hikes. On the flip side, according to the government, the harm of SO2 emissions was limited. The Environment Ministry claimed that there was no significant difference in ambient SO2 levels between areas with FGD fitted plants and those without. That is, the FGD simply did very little to change health outcomes. Even if power generators bore all those costs, that would do little to improve health outcomes. So, is this actually true? We simply don't know. This, however, has received some criticism. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, or CREA, released a report claiming that these conclusions are erroneous. It criticized the government's findings on ambient SO2 levels, claiming that there were flaws in how these were measured. The think tank asserts that FGDs made a serious dent in sulfate concentrations as far as 200 kilometers away from a plant. So, what led to the policy revision? Ultimately, though, that debate is secondary. Even if everyone concurred on the effects of SO2 emissions, they would have to face hard truths about economics and governance. Ultimately, it's just hard to make policies that actually work. If it were so easy for power plant operators to cut down SO2 emissions, a mere rule would do the job. But this was, in fact, so difficult that compliance was effectively more challenging than not complying. And these upgrades would immediately hurt the financial viability of a thermal power producer. Many plants did issue tenders for FGDs only to realize that bid prices were much higher than expected. There were serious issues with many, from low participation to supply chain issues, potentially requiring more rounds of tendering as well. And if those tenders would go through, they would face serious downtime, around 3 to 6 months. This hurt their top line and would put them at risk of violating their power purchase agreements. So, would they recover any of that money? That would depend on how well they could navigate the system. They would need regulatory permission to pass on those costs to consumers. It took till 2019 for the first round of clearances to come through, when the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission allowed FGD costs to be added to tariffs. But there were other layers to get through. State regulators moved slowly, while distribution companies, which are the ones actually buying power, balked at the prospect of higher rates. But what would happen if you dragged your feet? So far, there was little punishment for missing deadlines. The government seemed to understand just how difficult this all was, which is why it was happy to extend these deadlines for compliance. The idea of imposing fines emerged only in 2022, and those too were largely theoretical. As of mid 2025, not a single plant had been penalized for SO2 norm violations. So, in some ways, non compliance was actually the easier route to take. Now, there are countries that have been more successful than us. Consider China's experience. A couple of decades ago, China's thermal power sector was as dirty as India's. Yet, China managed to retrofit over 90% of its coal plants with FGD technology by the mid 2010s, slashing SO2 emissions by more than 70% in just 15 years. So, how did they do this? Beijing took a carrot and stick approach. It punished non compliance, but crucially, it encouraged compliance too. China established hefty fines and even criminal liability for plant managers who violated emission standards. Meanwhile, it offered a tariff premium for coal power with FGDs. Plants received extra payment per kilowatt hour if they operated scrubbers. The government also ramped up domestic manufacturing of FGD equipment and ensured there were enough engineering firms to make installations at scale. So, if there's a lesson for India, it's this. Some problems are too hard to solve by just telling businesses to do something. So, for good policy making, you need to preempt where your plans can fail and nip those problems in the bud. This moment underscores the broader crossroads that India's energy transition is at. While we're making tremendous progress in setting up new renewables projects, coal still forms our energy backbone, accounting for around 75% of electricity generation today. Thermal power in India is simply too vast, complicated, and important to experiment with. Retrofitting them at scale, at speed, and without crushing consumers or bankrupting operators is a Herculean task. In some ways, it's harder to shift the needle on this legacy industry than to create something new from scratch. For now, the exemption signals that India is choosing to protect its grid and its consumers over environmental gains. The real question, though, is what comes next. Can we use this breathing room to build a smarter path forward, or are we simply kicking the can down the road? Now, coming to the next story about understanding solar manufacturing through MV's DRHP. So, MV Photovoltaic Power Limited recently filed its papers for an IPO worth Rs 3,000 crores. To us, this created a fantastic window into a world we hadn't explored before on how those blue panels on rooftops actually get made, what are the drivers and the risks of manufacturing them, and the financials that come with it. And that's what we're going to pass through with you today. Making solar panels is a sophisticated process, one that transforms ordinary sand into electricity generating technology. And this happens over 5 steps. To start with, sand is treated with energy intensive chemical processes until it turns into ultra pure polysilicon. Next, all that polysilicon is melted and cooled into perfect crystal ingots. These are sliced into wafers thinner than paper with extreme precision. Any imperfection here ruins the final product. Those wafers are then turned into actual solar cells. Workers create electrical contacts by applying a silver paste while the back surface is covered in an aluminium paste. This is all heated and treated with chemicals to create the electrical properties that turn sunlight into electricity. One cell can only create so much electricity, and so these are bunched into modules. Cells are arranged, connected with thin wires, and sealed between protective glass and polymer layers. Aluminium frames provide structure to the entire module, while junction boxes handle electrical connections. Finally, these modules are installed, deployed, and plugged into the grid, work that happens close to where the panels will be used. MV operates in the third and fourth of these steps. It takes silicon wafers and turns them into modules. So MV calls itself the second largest pure play integrated solar photovoltaic module and solar cell manufacturing company and one of the largest solar PV module manufacturers in India. The company runs 4 manufacturing facilities in Karnataka, and together these can manufacture 7.8 gigawatts of modules and 2.94 gigawatts of solar cells a year. For context, India has a total solar manufacturing capacity of 82 gigawatts for modules and 23 gigawatts for cells as of FY25. So the company effectively controls a tenth of the market. But that'll only tell you so much. To really understand the company, you have to understand one thing. This is a market where everything is in flux. It's marked by everything from intense technological change to heavy government involvement to the world's greatest manufacturing whale, China. Any business in this space must contend with one fact. Solar cell technology is still young and is evolving rapidly. New technologies keep coming up, each one harder to make than the last, even as they offer higher efficiency. Until recently, multicrystalline silicon cells dominated the market. They were relatively cheap to produce but could only convert 15 to 17% of the sunlight hitting them into usable electricity. However, as the industry matured, efficiency became paramount. In just a few years, multicrystalline cells have virtually disappeared from the Indian market, dropping from 73% market share in March 2022 to almost nothing by 2025. Right now, mono PERC or passivated emitter and rare contact technology is the industry workhorse, achieving efficiencies of around 23%. With a 63% share, this currently dominates the Indian market. Most manufacturers have built their production lines around this process. But this technology as well is fast approaching its theoretical efficiency limits. If past experience is anything to go by, it might quickly disappear too. So, what comes next? A promising new technology is TOPCon or tunnel oxide passivated contact. TOPCon cells can achieve efficiencies over 25%. Equally, they're much better in low light conditions, maintaining 97% efficiency even when sunlight is in short supply. They also lose less efficiency when they get hot, a crucial advantage in India's climate. At the same time, manufacturing TOPCon cells is much harder than PERC. It takes more expensive equipment and is harder to master. But if you can manage it, those very things become a moat. And that's the heart of MV's promise. It wants to stand out for how advanced it is. It's an early adopter of TOPCon technology, and in fact, its Bangalore facility is one of the country's largest TOPCon solar cell manufacturing facilities. At the same time, though, it also produces traditional mono PERC modules for price sensitive consumers. But with this comes a hidden challenge. Whenever the next technological wave comes around, MV will have to either pivot or perish. This is an industry that lives and dies by government policy. To most solar cell manufacturers, the government is likely to be one of the biggest buyers there is. But the government doesn't just buy from anyone. It has an approved list of models and manufacturers, or ALMM, which is a list of pre approved domestic manufacturers who meet stringent quality and testing standards. Government solar projects can only use panels from them. A system like ALMM has a dramatic impact on the industry. Consider this: for much of FY 2024, the government had suspended its ALMM program. Then, suddenly, on April 1st, 2024, the ALMM came back to life. Overnight, the cheaper Chinese imports that had dominated the markets were cut out. Suddenly, across the board, Indian manufacturers started charging premium prices. All their revenues suddenly leapt by many multiples. MV is an ALMM listed manufacturer. They have clear access to this protected market segment, and in the last couple of years, that has done wonders for their numbers. Take their revenue. In FY 2023, the company generated Rs 618 crores in revenue from operations. This grew to Rs 952 crore in FY 2024, which was a 54% year-over-year increase. But the very next year, in FY 2025, their revenue reached Rs 2,336 crores, a 145% increase from the previous year. As revenues grew, the company's profitability improved as well. Its EBITDA margins improved dramatically from 9.1% in FY 2023 to 12.7% in FY 2024. They surged to 30.9% in FY 2025. With that, its PAT margins went from a modest 1.5% in FY 2023 to 3% in FY 2024 and then achieved 15.8% in FY 2025. And with that, their absolute profits have zoomed at a stunning pace. From Rs 9 crore in FY 2023, in just 2 years, its PAT surged to Rs 369 crore in FY 2025. Much of this is a result of government policy. If anything, that will only become more important in the future. The government is now coming up with ALMM 2 starting from June 2026. With this, government projects will have to use modules made from domestically manufactured cells. Businesses can't just buy cells from abroad and assemble them into modules. That will, in short, be a whole new niche for Indian manufacturers to exploit. But, like with so much else, China basically controls the world's solar manufacturing industry from start to finish. It controls more than 80% of the capacity in each step, including a massive 96% of the wafer making stage. MV, like anyone else in this space, buys a lot of the raw material it needs from China. In FY 2025, for instance, 55.73% of all their raw materials came in from China. As so many other industries are finding out to their peril, like auto manufacturers, as we spoke about previously, this dependence can be a severe risk. One policy change from either side could suddenly put this business at risk. India, for instance, could suddenly slap import duties and restrictions. China, meanwhile, could just as easily choke outbound supplies. Either would wrap their operations in uncertainty and volatility. So why is MV going for a Rs 3,000 crore IPO? It's primarily trying to repay its debt. Right now, MV, along with its subsidiaries, have outstanding borrowings of over Rs 2,700 crore. They borrowed a lot of this money over the last few years to set up plants for TOPCon manufacturing facilities. This IPO will help them pay off more than rupees 1,600 crore of this debt load. Right now, the company has a debt equity ratio of 3.63. That's very high. For every 1 rupee that belongs to the company shareholders, the company currently owes 3.63 rupees in debt. But that could change quickly. Once this IPO is done, its debt load will look a lot smaller. Meanwhile, if its revenues keep picking up at their current pace, they'll suddenly seem to justify that massive debt load. So, how should you see this company? MV's story is both exciting and precarious. This IPO presents a rare chance to buy into a company that's riding two powerful tailwinds: a domestic policy framework that favors local manufacturers, and a technological leap that could make it a leader in India's solar push. At the same time, it's a business bound to the whims of policy and is vulnerable to China's overwhelming dominance. It'll also keep playing catch up as new technologies emerge. Now, there isn't a straightforward story to tell. To invest in the company right now is to bet on government support holding steady, on MV keeping pace with innovation, and on India building a solar industry that can thrive despite its dependencies. But if those bets pay off, MV could just be a pivotal player in the country's energy future. Now, coming to the tidbits. Larsen and Toubro's green energy arm will build, own, and operate a new plant at IOCL's Panipat refinery that will supply 10,000 tons of green hydrogen per year for 25 years. The project directly aligns with India's National Green Hydrogen Mission, which wants to turn the country into a global production hub. It will also help IOCL reduce emissions at one of its largest refineries, showing how legacy fossil fuel players are now becoming hydrogen buyers. When we broke down green hydrogen earlier, we said India's dream was bold: 5 million tons of clean hydrogen by 2030. And this is just another example of its commitment. Adani is tightening its cement play. The NCLT has approved the merger of Adani Cementation into Ambuja Cements, consolidating the group's cement empire under one roof. Just last month, Ambuja crossed 100 MTPA in capacity, largely through M&As. This merger takes things further, streamlining operations, unlocking mine access, and absorbing under construction sites from Adani Cementation. We explore the cement industry through their financial results. Let's see how this news adds to our next edition. Now, India's oil regulator, PNGRB, has mandated that city gas distributors charge a uniform rate for household piped natural gas, eliminating tiered pricing based on consumption. This move aims to prevent misuse of subsidized gas and ensure fair pricing for all domestic consumers. Now, we question whether CNG is losing its spark, especially following APM gas allocation cuts. Maybe this could help, but only time will tell. Microsoft is likely to sign the European Union's voluntary AI Code of Practice, aiming to align with the EU's AI Act by enhancing transparency and copyright compliance. In contrast, Meta has rejected the guidelines, citing legal uncertainties and concerns over potential overreach. AI is growing so fast that just a monthly roundup doesn't seem enough to cover all the developments. Coming to the next tidbit. Reliance Retail has launched Agio Rush, a 4-hour fashion delivery service now available in 6 major Indian cities including Mumbai, Delhi NCR, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Ahmedabad. Agio Rush leverages Reliance's existing warehousing and logistics network to enable quick turnarounds without the high costs associated with newer quick commerce players. There's a new entrant to quick commerce and it's going beyond groceries. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.